He wanted nothing more than a quiet night under the stars, on land that had belonged to his family for generations. But within minutes, flashing lights cut through the darkness, and armed officers surrounded him, summoned by neighbors who were certain he didn't belong. They didn't know the truth. They didn't realize they were the ones trespassing. How could a man on his own property become the target of suspicion and fear? And what unfolded next would expose more than prejudice. It would uncover a painful reality about who is seen as worthy of peace and who is not. It was supposed to be a weekend of peace. Marcus, a 42-year-old father and lifelong outdoorsman, had finally carved out time to camp by the small lake on his own ranch. The land had been in his family for decades, a quiet stretch of water and trees that carried childhood memories of fishing trips with his grandfather and family barbecues in the summer heat. For Marcus, it wasn't just land, it was legacy, a place where he felt safe, rooted, and free. He arrived with his gear, pitched a simple tent, and let the calm of the evening settle around him. Birds skimmed the water's surface. The smell of pine drifted through the air. For once, there was no schedule to keep, no emails to answer, no noise from the outside world pressing in. Just Marcus, the land, and silence. But while Marcus saw home, others saw something different. From across the property line, curious eyes lingered. Neighbors driving past slowed down, frowning at the sight of a lone black man camped by the lake. To them, it didn't look like heritage. It didn't look like ownership. It looked suspicious. Marcus didn't know it yet, but calls were already being made. Assumptions were already forming. And before the night was over, that quiet moment he had fought to create would be shattered in the most humiliating way. Marcus didn't notice the first car that slowed to a crawl near the fence line. He was too busy stacking firewood and setting a small flame to boil water for coffee. But the second car lingered longer, headlights sweeping across the lake, illuminating his campsite like a stage. Inside, he could almost feel the stairs. Windows, rolled down just enough for whispers to carry, though the words were lost to the night air. Still, Marcus knew the look, the mix of suspicion and judgment that had followed him all his life. What he didn't know was that calls were already being made. Suspicious person on private land. A man with camping gear. No one mentioned his name, his family, his ownership of the very soil they were driving across. To the HOA members in their comfortable homes, Marcus wasn't a landowner. He was a problem. Minutes turned to hours, and the night deepened. Marcus lay back, staring at the stars, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering. Then, the sudden glare of red and blue lights broke the stillness. The sound of tires crunching. Gravel echoed across the ranch. Police, multiple cars, doors slammed, heavy boots hit the ground. His chest tightened. Why here? Why now? The thought raced through his mind. He stood slowly, hands visible, knowing too well how a single wrong gesture could spiral. Officers fanned out, flashlights cutting through the trees, voices sharp and commanding. Marcus tried to speak, to explain. "This is my land," he wanted to say. But their tone made it clear. They weren't here to listen. They were here to confront. One officer gestured toward the tent. Another pointed at Marcus's truck parked near the lake. They barked questions. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" Each one laced with accusation, not curiosity. As Marcus answered, he felt the disbelief in their stares. His words carried no weight against the assumptions etched into their minds. He pulled out his ID, hands trembling, praying they would see the truth before something irreversible happened. The badge confirmed his name. The documents confirmed the property. But still, suspicion lingered. An officer muttered about needing to verify, as though Marcus's life story on paper couldn't possibly be real. The humiliation cut deep. On the land where his grandfather once stood proudly, Marcus now stood like an intruder, lit up by flashlights, surrounded by strangers who saw him as less than human. The neighbors who had called it in never came to check, never asked, never cared. They had assumed, and their assumption summoned danger to his doorstep. As Marcus's voice cracked with frustration, one question pounded in his chest. How could a man be trespassing on his own land? And yet, the night wasn't over. What happened? Next would take this from a moment of disbelief to an ordeal that Marcus, and everyone watching, would never forget. The night that was meant to bring peace had turned into a nightmare. Marcus stood frozen by the water's edge, arms raised, a wall of police lights blinding his vision. Flashlights seared into his eyes, making him look like prey caught in a trap. An officer's hand hovered dangerously close to his holster, every muscle tense, as if Marcus's very existence was a threat. He repeated the words, "This is my land. This is my land." But his voice cracked against the hard silence of disbelief. To the officers, it sounded less like truth and more like defiance. Each second felt like borrowed time. Each breath, a negotiation between life and death. One officer stepped closer, barking at him to back away from his own tent, as though every piece of evidence around him, the truck, the gear, the property papers, were props in some elaborate lie. The humiliation burned, but fear dug deeper. Because Marcus had seen this scene before. He had read the headlines, seen the videos, mourned the names. One wrong move, one twitch mistaken for aggression, and he could become the next story people debated on social media. The air thickened as more neighbors gathered at a distance, some with phones raised, recording. Their lenses didn't capture a landowner protecting his family's legacy. They captured a black man surrounded, accused, cornered. And that was the image the world was ready to believe. Marcus's knees felt weak, his pulse hammering in his ears. He thought of his children, asleep at home, expecting their father to return safe. He thought of his grandfather, who once dreamed this land would always be a place of freedom. And now, it was the very place threatening to erase him. In that suffocating moment, one thought cut sharper than fear itself. Would this be the night his own land claimed him, not as its owner, but as its casualty? Eventually, the officers backed down. The documents Marcus carried, the deed in his name, the license plates registered to his address, all undeniable proof, finally forced them to step away. But the damage had already been done. The night of peace he had longed for was gone, replaced by flashing lights, humiliation, and a memory that would scar far longer than any campfire ember. Marcus packed his gear in silence, his hands shaking, the weight of what had almost happened pressing on his chest. He wasn't arrested, he wasn't hurt. But he had been made small, on his own land, on the soil where his family's history lived, and that wound cut deeper than any bruise. Because this wasn't just about one man and one night. It was about a system where ownership, hard work, and legacy meant nothing when skin color was enough to erase it all in the eyes of others. It was about the fear that even when you're right, even when the law is on your side, you can still be treated as if you don't belong. Marcus drove away that night, knowing he would return to his ranch again. But he would never see it the same way. The lake that once meant freedom now carried a shadow, a reminder that in America, even home isn't always safe when you're black. And so the question lingers, echoing far beyond his story. How many more families must prove they belong? Before belonging is finally enough?